I can't thank you guys enough. The Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Jade and Yuki character breakdown video is at 10,000 views, and I couldn't be more grateful for the support, and I'm so glad you guys like the GX content. I definitely want to do more character breakdowns for some of the other GX characters, because GX is my childhood, and it is one of my favorite animes of all time, and I even got a Jade and Yuki figure that I've always wanted for my birthday from my buddy Milo. Check it out, it's amazing. I love this figure so much. But today, we are going to talk about one of my favorite characters in the whole series, Zane Truesdale. So growing up, Zane was probably one of the coolest anime characters in the mid-2000s, and his archetype of cyber dragons was honestly overshadowing Jaden's elemental heroes. The cyber dragon archetype was just so cool. Like, every kid wanted the cyber dragons, and it is still a very expensive card to get nowadays. And even now in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of people like playing cyber dragons and try to find new meta support for this deck. And it honestly kind of changed the game and kind of defined the GX era. And not to mention, Zane had a really crazy character development and character arc that's not talked about really at all. And that is the downfall of child prodigies. You know how growing up you would see certain kids that would excel at like school or sports, and they were touted to be this amazing athlete or scholar in their adult years. But once we got out of high school, they kind of fizzled out. Like, they didn't find their footing in college. And some of them even dropped out or gave up entirely on the passions that we thought would carry them into the future. And this is exactly what happened to Zane Truesdale. Since the beginning of the series, Zane was introduced as the best student at Duel Academy and the #1 prospect for the Pro League. He also served as the only person who actually beat Jaden during season 1, which is monumental because up until this point, the protagonist of a Yu-Gi-Oh series never really lost. And granted, we only have the original series that came before GX, and Yugi only lost to Kaiba when he threatened suicide, and then also in the Orichalcos filler arc. So seeing an actual protagonist of a Yu-Gi-Oh series lose, especially in season 1, was shocking, and Zane was the guy to do it. So Zane Truesdale stocks in 2005 were at an all-time high. Like, this man was the GOAT. And he stood as a wall for Jaden to overcome and to push him to be the best duelist he could be. And during season 1, Zane really lived up to being the best duelist on Duel Academy. And also, he would mentor Cyrus, his little brother, into becoming the duelist that he always knew he could be. And even saving Cyrus from the shadow game with the Shadow Riders, Zane was always this pillar of strength that everyone could rely on and feel at ease when he was around. And he beat Jaden at the beginning of season 1, but at the end of season 1, when Zane was about to graduate from Duel Academy, he chose Jaden to be his final opponent for his graduation duel. And in an epic turn of events, him and Jaden ended in a tie, signifying Jaden's growth to become the #1 duelist to take over after Zane leaves and goes on to greener pastures. And this is very typical for those prodigy teenagers to cultivate the next generation before they leave their respective institutions. Then jump to season 2, we see that Zane is having an amazing start in his pro career. Zane has an impressive 10 win streak and is superseding the expectations that those at Duel Academy had of him. That is until he meets Aster Phoenix, who becomes the first person in the series to actually defeat Zane, you know, aside from Camula, who threatens to kill Cyrus if Zane doesn't forfeit the duel. And this loss hits Zane really hard, and he spirals out of control and loses pretty much every duel he participates in after the Aster Phoenix duel. And I really love how GX portrayed child prodigies because a lot of them don't transition well into adulthood, because at a young age they are told that they have limitless possibilities and are praised by everyone around them. So these children put a lot of unrealistic expectations on themselves to be the best at whatever they are talented at or praised for. And a lot of the times when you make it to the real world, you realize that there are a lot of people just as good as you, if not better. And that really messes with kids' self-esteem. You go from being the best in your small town or small school to a world where you aren't seen as anything but average. And a lot of kids have had positive reinforcement their whole life, or have been told that they have so much to offer until they go to college or some other field which is way bigger in scope than what they're used to, and then they realize that they do not stack up to the competition. And this shock affects kids in a lot of different ways. Being a teenager is your most vulnerable and developmental time in your life. So if your identity is being this child prodigy or being this child genius, and you lose it when you move to the next stage in life, you lose semblance of who you are. And when you lose yourself, a lot of these kids turn to alcohol and drugs to kind of find meaning or purpose in their life when they couldn't fulfill the role that they thought they were going to do. And this happened with Zane. But instead of drugs or alcohol, Zane turned towards the dark cyber dragons and black latex. When he kept losing, he lost sense of who he was. He was supposed to be Duel Academy's best. He was supposed to represent what the school was supposed to be and the institution he came from, but he let everyone down and he kept falling further and further. And he lost who he was. And that's why he was so vulnerable enough to even consider underground dueling, where he was putting himself through this twisted version of the game because he was so lost. And by turning to underground dueling, Zane finally discarded the weight and expectations that Duel Academy had placed on him from a very young age, and Zane rebuilt himself. Unfortunately, Zane was influenced by the people around him and was corrupted by the darkness of the world and became someone else entirely. So Zane used to always respect his opponents and play for the fun of the game, but after spending time underground dueling, and once he attained the Dark Cyber Dragon deck, he stopped respecting his opponents and just dueled to win. He no longer cared about what makes duel monsters and just cared about brutally crushing his opponents. And this change in Zane is all because of Mr. Shroud, who is Zane's manager, because he caught Zane at his lowest point in life. When everyone gave up on Zane and Zane gave up on himself, Mr. Shroud took advantage of that and took Zane into this underground dueling and then manipulated him into becoming this new version of himself. And Zane was pretty evil. Like, he even dueled his younger brother Cyrus and put him through an underground duel where he purposely tried to hurt and damage Cyrus. Like, that's your own little brother, but Zane viciously beat him. And Zane's friends tried to pull him out of this dark identity. We had Atticus, who tried to duel Zane and go into the darkness as a Shadow Rider, but still it was null and void, and Zane reassured Atticus that he hasn't lost control and that this is just who he is now. But Zane starts to slowly come back to who he was in seasons 3 and season 4 when he starts enjoying dueling again for the sake of dueling. During season 2, when he went on his dark era, he really just cared about crushing his opponents with all his might. But season 3, when he duels against Jesse Anderson, when Jesse Anderson is in a parallel dimension, he's having more fun dueling Jesse. And he doesn't really care about crushing him completely, he just wants to have a fun duel. And this point is emphasized again when Zane duels Jesse again, but when Jesse is possessed by Yubel. And Zane shouldn't be dueling because all the time he spent underground dueling has dulled his heart and he is having a lot of heart attacks while he's dueling, but he wants to push himself as a duelist and test his limits, which is kind of going back to the old Zane when he was at Duel Academy, when he actually just wanted to push and be the best he could be. And this culminates to Zane finally realizing who he is and coming back to his old self in season 4. When he returns home to Duel Academy, where his friends and family are, Zane kind of regains his old self. He is a doting brother to Cyrus and a mentor to those at Duel Academy. And just like Jaden, who changed a lot during the course of this series, by the end of the series, both Jaden and Zane come back to who they were when they first came to Duel Academy. And I think a lot of kids that grew up as child prodigies or with a lot of positive reinforcement on their intellect or skills can relate to Zane and also understand the pitfalls he went through because they might have gone through the same thing in their life. I think Zane's character is vital to the series because it gives a sense of realism. There are a lot of kids that struggle with this pressure that is put on by others and they don't know how to deal with it. And Zane is an example of what happens when those pressures are too much for the child to bear. And I believe that Zane is a reminder of what the pressures of being a child prodigy could be, and that it's okay to lose your way as you rediscover who you are and not what others told you to be. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.